All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Elizabeth Denton, and I'm ACT's Membership Experience Manager. I want to thank you all for joining us today for ACT's first September webinar. Hard to believe it's September already. This webinar, Mobility Masterclass, Integrating Public Transit in the Mid-Atlantic, is sponsored by VIA Transportation. Thank you very much, VIA. Before we hear from our presenters, I want to quickly take care of a few housekeeping items. First of all attendees are on mute during this webinar. If you have a question or a problem hearing us, please type it in the chat box located at the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to answer your questions as the webinar gets going. We'll be hosting a Q&A at the end of the webinar, but please feel free to type your questions in as we go in the Q&A box located at the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. If you're like me, you might forget it if you don't type it in right away. So go ahead and put that in as you think of it. When you're asking a question, please identify who the question is for as you're typing it in there. And then finally, this session is being recorded, and we'll have the recording up on the ACT website within 24 hours after the presentation ends. And so now I'd like to pass things over to David Strauss, ACT's Executive Director, to give an update on what ACT is currently working on. David?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Good afternoon. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. As the premier association for TDM professionals, our goal is always to build a strong community of individuals and organizations working to advance and implement TDM at their work sites and within their communities. Webinars like today's are an important benefit to you as a member of ACT, providing you with valuable information and trends and important knowledge to make you more impactful in the work that you do. To each of our non-members joining us today, and there are many, welcome. I invite you to become a member of our ACT community. I guarantee you that ACT membership will be a valued investment in your professional growth with many valuable opportunities like today's webinars. After today's event, you'll receive a note from Elizabeth offering an opportunity to connect and learn more about the association. I hope to meet you soon as a member. I know we have a full program, but before we get started, I wanted to provide some quick updates to everyone about some of the happenings within ACT. First, I want to thank all of you that were able to join us in Disney World last month for our international conference. Held during a surge of COVID, we had over 200 of you join us for 4 days of networking and some great sessions. Even with the heat, the humidity, the face masks, the distancing, we still managed to have a lot of fun riding autonomous vehicles, hosting a great costume contest, and even some excursions into the parks. A big shout out to all of the members that volunteered their time to plan this fabulous event and making sure that it was a safe one for all of us to be at. Registration is now open for our TDM Forum, November 9th to 10th in Atlanta, Georgia. The forum presents a unique opportunity to gather and learn about current TDM issues facing the industry. This year's event will feature new programming that encourages more debate and discussion amongst attendees, and we're developing plans for some exciting tours and offsite events. Please know that we will be focusing significant attention to creating a safe event modeled after the COVID protocols we had in place for the international conference. So we hope that you'll be able to join us in person in a couple months. ACT is currently in the midst of our elections for our board of directors. We have a fabulous group of candidates that have stepped up to run, and I encourage all of you to visit the website and review their candidate statements. Voting is open through the end of next week, so be sure to vote soon. As a volunteer-driven organization, professional association, it's the responsibility of all members to participate in selecting who will be leading the organization over the next 2 years. As we journey through the pandemic, implementing our 5-year strategic plan, there are many important discussions and decisions that will need to be made, and it's the board that will have the important responsibility in guiding the organization through it all. So I encourage you to choose wisely. Lastly, nominations for ACT's Impact Leadership Program are currently open but closing soon. If you or a member of your team are interested in strengthening your leadership skills, building a cohort of peers from across the country and deepening your knowledge of TDM, I invite you to submit an application for this 9-month program that kicks off with a 3-day retreat in January. Information is on our website. So now it's on to today's webinar, Mobility Masterclass, Integrating Public Transit in the Mid-Atlantic region, sponsored by Via Transportation. Today, we convene 3 transit leaders to examine the latest microtransit innovations in Mid-Atlantic. We'll take a deep dive into how these transit providers operate and collaborate across the region to provide accessible and flexible public transportation, address service challenges, and learn about their plans to tackle the future of mobility post-pandemic. It's now my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Joe McAndrew. Joe is Vice President for Regional Mobility and Infrastructure at the Greater Washington Partnership, where he develops and drives all activity relating to the partnership's regional mobility initiative. Prior to joining the partnership, he served as the legislative assistant for the Senate Commerce Committee and Senator Brian Schatz. Before working on Capitol Hill, Joe served as the policy director for Transportation for America. He holds a bachelor's degree in management from Luther College and a master's in community and regional planning from the University of Oregon, and lives in Arlington, Virginia with his wife. Joe, I turn it over to you.
Thanks, David, and thank you everyone for joining today's conversation. Thank you to Via for wrangling this one and making sure that we've got a great conversation. I will jump right into it, if that's all right with folks. Just so everybody knows who's on the phone, we've got an exciting group of panelists with us that really kind of stretch the breadth of services provided within the transit and mobility space. And I'd like to introduce them to everybody before we go ahead and get into questions. First up, we'll go one by one, and Nathan Attard, if you don't mind kind of introducing yourself a bit about your position and the agency that you serve, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. I appreciate it. Again, my name is Nate Attard. I'm the strategic planner in the Office of Innovation at the Delaware Transit Corporation. It's an operating division of the Delaware Department of Transportation. I'm a professional planner. Our Office of Innovation supports not only this, but also our emerging autonomous mobility efforts in Delaware. I've been working in the DelDOT family since 2018 in other planning roles as well. So my organization, Delaware Transit Corporation, does business as DART for state. For anyone who lives in the Delaware, Philadelphia area. We operate 58 different routes around the state. Our ridership is primarily concentrated in the north of Delaware, in and around Wilmington, a very urban service. We serve about 15,000 or so weekly on our fixed route service. But we have fixed route throughout the state of Delaware, all the way to the Maryland state line at the southernmost point, including serving some really rural geographies. And that is primarily what we'll discuss today in terms of our on-demand microtransit pilot. We're also an operator of statewide paratransit services, and that carries about 2,500 or so folks a day. These numbers are down as many other agencies are from COVID in the 40 to 50% range, respectively, for our 2 services. So I'm excited to be here today and to talk about our on-demand microtransit pilot in Georgetown and Millsboro, Delaware, known as DART Connect. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Nate. And one day, hopefully, you'll be a key player helping us close the MARC SEPTA commuter rail gap on the Northeast corridor. But that's for another conversation. Next up, we've got Tiffany Dubinsky from DRPT.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Tiffany Dubinsky. I am one of our statewide transit planning managers with the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation. Most of my focus over the last almost 4 years with DRPC has been on transit technology and innovation. So while in the past we may not been as involved, we have definitely started looking more into automated connected vehicles, shared or integrated mobility, also resulting in a statewide integrated mobility plan that we completed back in 2019, as well as other transit technology initiatives, including driver assistance systems. While we do not actually operate transit service outside of our Virginia Breeze intercity bus service, we do provide support, both technical and financial support, to our various transit agencies and partner organizations throughout the Commonwealth. So that's kind of how we lead ourselves into some of these innovation pilots, like what we'll be talking about today. We reached out to both Bay Transit and MEOC with an opportunity through FTA and their, I will always mess it up, Integrated Mobility Innovation Grant Program. We are so full of acronyms these days. But we found that there was an opportunity to discover a little bit more about microtransit outside of the normal deployments, especially more into rural areas that may have a stronger need for it. So I am welcome to stay by the end of this.
Perfect. Thank you, Tiffany. And Tiffany gets a lot of emails from me asking to do cool and innovative things, and we like to partner together. Next up, we've got Mitch Elliott with the Mountain Empire Transit System.
Hello, I'm glad to join this forum. My name is Mitchell Elliott. I'm the transit director for Mountain Empire Older Citizens, and we are the transit component of the local area agency on aging. We are all demand response, and our area is basically the definition of rural America. We have 47 body on chassis buses that we use. And we have three high top vans that we use for this program. The name itself gives to area agency on aging. When it comes to things with technology, everybody says, we can't do this because our people don't understand the technology part. But we found out that that's far different than some people have the idea. So our service started just a little over a month ago, and we've been really pleased with not only pleased with the service, but pleased with the folks through VIA that helped us with the technology aspect.
Perfect. Thank you, Mitch. Next up, we've got Terry Heron with the Montgomery County Department of Transportation here in Maryland.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me today. I'm excited to be on this panel. I work for Ride on Transit. I'm the manager of IT services for transit services at McDOT, which is Montgomery County Department of Transportation. We are a suburb of the DC area, as Joe mentioned. We are the most populous county in the state of Maryland, serving about 1 million residents. Primarily, we operate a fixed route service. We have 80 fixed routes that we operate every day. Basically, it's a collector distributor to the Metro. We're part of the Washington Metropolitan Area Regional Transit Authority Greater Division. We added as a pilot back in 2019, the Flex service, which is our on-demand with mobility services to very small zones, and it was wildly successful. So we've since restarted it sort of post-pandemic, and we're looking forward to it continuing to grow.
Perfect. Thank you, Terry. And one random tidbit that I learned that I was kind of amazed when I first started at the partnership. Ride on Service has more service hours and greater service provided than areas such as Orlando, Florida, Buffalo, New York, but it's oftentimes not recognized as a major transit player just because it is in the WMATA territory, which is very large in its own regard. But excited to have you here. And last but certainly not least, we've got Ken Pollock with the Bay Transit System.
Hi, thank you. Yes, I'm with Bay Transit. We are much like Mitch, we are a division of an area agency on aging, Bay Aging, in the eastern portion of Virginia. Mitch has got the western end of the state covered, and we've got the eastern end of the state. We provide rural public transportation, almost exclusively demand response service throughout 12 counties, over 3,000 square miles, and a population of about 150,000. So it's a very rural area along the Chesapeake Bay on the eastern coast of Virginia. Much like Mitch, we have just gotten involved in the pilot project with DRPT and FTA on the microtransit piece. The majority of our riders are transportation dependent individuals, and we're challenged by covering such a large area and having such a small population within that area.
Definitely, definitely. Well, thank you very much for everybody on the panel joining in here today. And I'm going to try my best to make sure that we can cover as much ground and make sure that we can provide as many lessons learned to those that are joining us here today. But maybe before we get into the innovative pilots that all of you are running, we've got a very, very wide range of services and service providers. And I'd love to kind of ask the million-dollar question, you know, how is the pandemic impacting your services? What have you guys learned? And you know, many of us in the transportation space thought that the pandemic, you know, was going to subside and we were going to be fully reopened post Labor Day, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Love to kind of open it up, and maybe we'll start with Nate at the top of the Mid-Atlantic. Love to kind of hear about your agency's experience and kind of how you're adapting.
Thank you. I appreciate that question. So in the near term, I think the biggest thing that we've done is we're required by the state to conduct biennial service changes, and this is in the domain of our service planning team. But they have used that pretty effectively to try to shift some of our resources away from routes that were primarily used by like 9-to-5 commuters, the type of folks who can work from home, to other areas, right? So those routes that have maintained ridership. They've done some interlining of routes so that people connecting through center cities to destinations on either side can get there relatively easily. We've also added we've added service hours on some weekends and holidays during the pandemic, really acknowledging that people need transportation beyond traditional work hours. So those are some of our bigger things. The other thing I would highlight is it was pretty simple, but we put a COVID-19 at a glance flyer on our website to provide some information to everyone who rides our service as to what we're doing. I'd point people in that direction if they're interested in the many different things that we've done so far. One of the things I'd like to highlight off of it is a study that we're actually working on to understand the efficacy of bus barriers. We've been working to protect our workforce by installing these on our fixed route and paratransit buses and keep both their customers and our workers safe. So we're really excited to learn how that's been working. Those are kind of our short-term things. In the long term, we've been looking at a transit redesign, like many agencies, really to try to focus on fast and frequent service in our urban areas, but also really to look at our suburban and rural places, especially with emerging on-demand technology, to see how we can better serve with transit many of the people around our state.
Wonderful. And taking liberty here, how far along are you guys in the bus network redesign effort?
We're not far at all. So we're really kind of getting our ideas together to potentially put out a request for proposal sometime in the future.
That's great. Love to learn from it as it goes. But maybe we'll go to Terry next as we head north to south.
Sure. I mean, similar to Nate, we learned the most important thing is obviously the protection of our operators as well as our ridership. So we also went the route of the protective barriers. We did actually reduce the number of passengers that were allowed in the vehicles as well. So that presented challenges. First off, our ridership was down, and second of all, we had a number of reduced operators because of the pandemic. So the challenge then became, how do you insert buses when one is passing people up because of its being full? So we had to collect information about the passenger counts on the vehicles and try to stage strategic buses. So that was a learning process for us. Part of the Washington metropolitan area also stopped fare collection for a time so that we could have people board from the rear of the buses to try to protect the passengers and the operators. And one of the things that's come about from that is we'll be working in the region actually to put validation systems on the rear doors. So that'll be interesting. Unfortunately, we did have to shut our flex service down during the pandemic because we use very small cutaway buses, and people were concerned about the ability to protect the ridership because our wheelchair lift, we only have the one entrance. But it's been interesting to watch it start to come back because our ridership is mostly transportation dependent as well. So it's starting to pick back up again, but we'll have to see where it goes.
Thank you. Thank you. Maybe we'll jump to maybe, I don't want to bunch it, but I imagine you might have similarities, Ken and Mitch, you know, how in a more rural setting and maybe a more different type of transit dependency, how has your systems evolved and shifted in terms of ridership and services?
Well, this is Ken. We obviously, when it first hit, we weren't sure what to do. We started discouraging people from riding because, you know, at that point, we were just taking people, essential workers and people to essential medical appointments such as dialysis and cancer treatments. And then demand started to pick up, and we implemented many of the same protocols that Terry was talking about with plexiglass shields and social distancing and reducing numbers on the buses. But the one thing we did that kind of turned things around is we turned it into a marketing campaign, and we developed a slogan called "Good to Go," meaning you're good to go on Bay Transit. And we highlighted the safety protocols. We did lots of radio ads and newspaper photo ops. We put wraps on the sides of our buses with "Good to Go." And we really saw a confidence return to our ridership. And we were probably back up to about 80% last October of our pre-COVID ridership. So we've been very pleased with how, we found a silver lining, I guess, out of all of the dark clouds there, and that was to promote our services and restore some confidence in our public.
That's great. That's great. Mitch?
And on our end, much like Ken, we had to kind of change from as our demand response. Most of our people are disadvantaged. We live in one of the poorest areas in the state of Virginia. Around 21% of our people are below the poverty level. So we became a lifeline to those. A lot of those people could not get out. So we had to change things as far as delivering meals and things that were that those folks had to have. And we not only are we rural, but we are challenged, geographically challenged too. We're a mountainous part of Southwest Virginia, and a lot of our people live in some places that are very hard to get to. Of course, we use Facebook and our webpage to remind people that we were doing all the protocols, all the safety and security things, and being a nonprofit agency, when it came to shields and things like that, we had to kind of use a MacGyver technology and figure out a way to do it. So we bought all the curtains that were available. I think they thought we were kind of axe murderers or something at first, because we bought all those curtains, and so that we could separate the driver and the passengers. And of course, we were using, the state of Virginia was one of the first to go to having people separated and wearing masks and things like that. But and then, of course, we didn't accept any fires during that time. And then we've kind of become a leader in, trying to get people vaccinated through our health departments and things like that. But we, like Ken, we learned a lot of lessons. We never did have to shut down any of our services. We had to watch to make sure that they were still profitable in some means. And but we learned that transit it's just not about getting people from point A to point B sometimes. But we learned through this that the community itself. Serving the community itself. If the problem is in the community, the answer is usually in the community. And so we learned that, a lot of times rural transit is the answer to the community. But we got a great story to tell. We just don't tell it often enough, or don't tell it well enough.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I'll shift to another question, but before I do, thank you to all of you, your colleagues and the frontline workers that were able to keep the region open as best we could and make sure that we could respond in a safe way to the challenges that the pandemic has brought. I'm going to shift a little bit because I think, many in the audience might be thinking we're here to talk about on-demand transit services, which I'm excited to explore with everybody here. So, let's kick things off. We got a slide here with DRPT's logo, and I'll ask Tiffany and we'll go around the horn here. Why choose on-demand transit? What was the challenge that you were trying to tackle? And what were, some of the challenges that you were facing to setting up and operationalizing this effort? I'll go to Tiffany and then to Ken and Mitch.
Sure. So we had been hearing from a lot of our transit agencies and partners about how to integrate shared mobility concepts into their existing service. And we wanted to take it from the approach that we wanted things to be complementary, that there wasn't something or these two forces acting against each other, because there was perceived threat, especially around like TNCs and how the services were coming into more urbanized areas, for example, that there was competition in terms of riderships and people using their services. So we started looking more into, mobility on demand, mobility as a service, microtransit, just to kind of see what was out there. And as we started seeing these deployments slowly roll out, we realized that the validation that came from urban areas testing out microtransit was there. But we wanted to be able to expand to see where the solutions would be for more rural areas that may have more gaps in service, that may not have the density that could support what would be typical microtransit environments. And so at the timing of us thinking about what would be some potential pilots or agencies that may have interest, that was when FTA released their notice about the Integrated Mobility Innovation Program. And so their focus with that grant program was either to be on either transit automation, mobile fare payment, or some kind of integration of mobility services. And so we thought this would be a great opportunity to think about looking at rural microtransit and maybe even expanding more into how do you start building the resources to educate in terms of technology for rural communities that may not have the resources or capacity to explore that on their own. The perspective that we've always had is that if there's a way to minimize the risk that our agencies have to take in order to test some of these new technologies, that would be what we provide for them. And so what launched up was that both Ken and Mitch were willing to partner with us. And I used to joke that it really, there's a term that we always talk about, public-private partnerships, so P3. In this case, it's more like public-public-private. So you have us at the state, and then you have Bay and MEOC, and then you have VIA, who have been an excellent partner. And as far as challenges, I have to say that a lot of the initial procurement has been something that we have not ventured into as much. From the state perspective, trying to think about statewide contracts and procurement, there's an advantage for us to be able to leverage our power as a state agency to think about, securing competitive rates and having some contracts available for partners to be able to, ride off of in order to test instead of spending the time for procurement. What we've found is that it's a little bit more complicated in the state of Virginia in terms of those dynamics. And because of some of the variables and unknowns that are coming across with microtransit or just shared mobility concepts, it takes a lot of education within various departments. So for this one, we actually had to go with Bay and MEOC to kind of go through the procurement in order to keep this from being from 2 to 3 years to a 5-year process because of our procurement in that process. I think that besides that, the other challenges really is just kind of thinking about what's the best deployment model, because it's never a one size fits all. And I think that there's been a wonderful flexibility with VIA to be able to look at both Bay and MEOC in terms of their services and what their needs are and the demographics that they're serving, and be able to customize it to what they need. And I think that the concept of being able to use the existing fleet and operators is there as well, which is something I think maybe people thought with microtransit that you may have to purchase additional vehicles or hire a third party in order to provide that service. So I think thinking about some of these new solutions through the help of VIA and their experience with some of their multiple deployments has definitely been an education piece. And what I hope to get out of this when we get through this, this pilot and this demo is that we'll have some best practices and lessons learned that we can share to other transit agencies. So it's hard to be the first. So I always give credit to Ken and Mitch for being willing to put themselves out there to try kind of this new service for them. But I'm sure that the benefit will ripple throughout the state.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, maybe we'll kick it over to the guinea pigs, Ken and Mitch. How does it feel? I hear you're 1 month into it. You know, what have you learned, and where are you guys thinking that this is going to head?
Well, first of all, we were very excited for the opportunity to be the first in Virginia to do rural microtransit. So we were jumping at the opportunity when DRPT approached us. It's worthwhile to note that although Mitch and I are partners in this, we are 300 or 400 miles away from each other and operate. You know, my geography is rivers and his is mountains. So we're really as far away as you can be and still be in the same state. But one of the things that I was just looking at the maps, one of the things we both had in common is we have a Walmart and a hospital. And so for our project, we looked at our largest county in our service area, and there's one centralized area. It's about 10 square miles, and that's what this zone is here, where there are new apartment complexes and new housing, the hospital and all of the medical offices that go along with it. There's a Walmart and all the other shopping that springs up beside a Walmart. And the complaint that we hear the most from our riders, particularly, you know, the demand responsive riders, is I have to schedule a trip 2 days in advance. I often have to wait long periods of time. You can't, you know, I'm at the Walmart, I'm ready to go home, and it's another hour before you can get back to me. So we were targeting the short 5-mile trips for people that live in this zone and need to go to services in the zone, as a way to also ease some of the burden on our demand responsive buses, and they could focus on the rural parts of the county. And this service would serve the people that were in that small little densely populated area where most of the services are and where most people go in the county. We're only a month in. We're very pleasantly surprised. Unlike Mitch, we have had more challenges with people using smartphones and getting people to actually download the app. That's been the biggest challenge. Once they use the service, we have lots of repeaters, but getting people to download the app has been our biggest challenge to date. And we're working with VIA on some strategies for how we can increase that moving forward.
That's great. That's great. Now to the mountains.
Here we go. As you can well see, we have a Walmart and a hospital. But one other thing that has been one other thing that's been a plus for us, we also have we have a college or university, the University of Virginia at Wise, as part of the University of Virginia. And we had a couple of years before, we had started a program that we would kind of work with them. So we kind of had a foothold in this area. And one thing I can say is, as well as Ken, we have to be able to, in order to survive, we got to be able to find another way to do things and get outside the box. And our hope was during all this process that we could take demand response and have it even as a feeder system to this, where most people in the area that we are, that's where the destinations of most of our people in one of our counties is. And so we looked at it from that aspect. And since all the people that call in for rides are pretty much, that kind of gives us a hands-on. We can talk to the individuals and tell them about the service and those things. And it's taken a lot of groundwork for us. We have put a lot of kind of boots on the groundwork for all these places. And like Ken said, one of the challenges is to get them to download it. But once they do, they find out that it is a worthwhile service, and many of our people are repeaters. One of the things that in our area, a lot of people can't afford a car. Yet there's so much of the transportation is such a challenge. We're the only public transportation in the area. There's no Uber, no Lyft, none of those things. So we are the only game in town. As Ken also mentioned, the one thing that hinders our people is you have to have a 24-hour notice. That doesn't help folks when they have to get up in the morning, or they've got a doctor's visit that they overlooked, or they have to go to the post office or some other, or go to the Walmart, for example. So this has been surprisingly, it's surprisingly, it has been a portion of the vision that we saw that could make it work. And again, without DRPT, we would have, and the FTA, of course, we would have never been able to have the funding that would be able to create an app and a project like this and to make it work. So we've been really pleased. I think this is the future for our rule of transportation, I believe. And so our goal is to integrate this throughout our whole service area. Like Ken, ours is very large and very spread out, but our goal is to integrate it throughout the whole system. And so it was just a great opportunity for us, and I think it'll work as well as we're willing to put effort into it, I think. And one other thing, we were able to use the resources at hand. We didn't have to go out and buy we didn't have to buy new vehicles and all those things. We were able to use the resources we had. And my great thought behind this is, when you talk about demand response and all those kind of systems, the question always comes up about first mile and last mile. And I really believe that this is an option to solve that problem.
Definitely. Thank you. We'll shift to the north to Terry in Montgomery County. A little bit more urban, and maybe a little bit more of a runtime on your system in terms of your on demand. I'd love to hear how the county came to the development of the service being provided, and kind of lessons learned pre-pandemic that you might be changing post-pandemic now that it's restarting.
Sure. It's great to have the opportunity to talk about that, because our planning sort of morphed a little bit along the way. Initial thoughts, I think, were honestly to look at microtransit as a way to maybe replace some of the lower ridership routes during certain times of the day. But what it ended up being more was first mile, last mile. Both of our zones actually serve, you see the little M there, those are metro lines. So they tried to pick fairly populated areas where people were more transportation dependent, if you will. So on the right in our Wheaton Glenmont zone, you see it's kind of an odd shape, and it actually encompasses two different metro stations as well as a mall. But that is highly popular for, or at least pre-pandemic, we're slowly coming back to commuters. So people that lived in the area would commute on a daily basis. We actually developed quite a large following of loyal riders to the metro stations back and forth. And that zone operates early in the morning and late in the evening. So it's really geared towards commuter traffic. The Rockville zone on the left is actually the middle of the day traffic. So it's geared more towards people that work in that area. One of the major destinations there is a shopping center, strip mall, or the basic restaurants that you see. So people that were working in the area. And the reason we did that is so that we could sort of see what the appetite of the population was for the the first mile, last mile on demand microtransit application. As I mentioned before, we have a fairly large fixed route service, and of course by law we're required to have paratransit as well, but that's actually operated by WMATA. So this was an introduction for our people to try to see what types of service they needed in addition. Originally, we also thought we would be doing first mile, last mile sort of in the evenings. But over time, it morphed, and it's become a very popular thing. We had quite a bit of ridership, and it was steadily growing. We have more people download the app than can actually use it, because the complaints that we get are, when's it coming to my neighborhood? And they want more and more zones. So then, of course, we have to take a look at that from a planning perspective and see what makes sense. We do indeed have a plan to add another zone. We've since developed a bus rapid transit line, and we hope to have a zone that will serve that as another connection point. But like DART, we are going to be reevaluating our network as well. So we'll see how that plays out. But it's been an interesting system. VIA has been a fantastic partner, because in the Washington area, one of the things people are really on about is having what we call the white label app. So if you pull up our app, it's actually dedicated for our service. And we have a customer service line as well to be able to take calls, because our senior population during the pilot was pretty adamant that for folks that don't have smartphones, it's really important for them to be able to schedule rides as well. So when we reactivated the service, we did add a call service that allows seniors or people that don't have smartphones to book the rides as well. And if I had to say the most important thing, once you're operating, it's reports. Being a fairly sizable transit agency, we're bound for reporting. And that's been one of the great features that VIA brought to the table, because the minute you turn the service on, everybody wants to know, well, how many people are riding, where did they go, and how many times have they ridden? So from the implementation standpoint, that's been really key. Of course, every piece, including marketing, once you're spinning it up, is important, but that's kind of our service in a nutshell. We do have our own vehicles. That was another challenge, because we're a transit agency. Our union sort of required that we operate the service ourselves. So we did brand and wrap them, and so that everybody driving around can sort of get instructions on how to use the service and where it goes. But like I said, our biggest complaint is everybody wants it in their neighborhood, and we'll see where that goes in the future. It's been steadily increasing since we turned it back on in July as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you. And I also, as a native DMV individual, am excited about WMATA's bus network redesign, as well as your bus network redesign, to see how we can do them all together. But let's head to the north then. Nate, love to hear about your deployment challenges and first steps that you guys took.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so many commonalities here between all the different services. So ours was funded by an Accelerating Innovative Mobility, or AIM grant, from the FTA. When the NOFO came out in early 2020, there was a priority for rural areas. So we started looking around different parts of our state that had proven transportation needs. And one of the ones that made sense was the Georgetown and Millsboro area. They had been the location of 2 of our flex route services since 2014. But at that time, we had actually moved some of our service to operating Saturday service, and these did not operate on Saturday. So they had been basically shut down. It seemed like a good opportunity to perhaps really expand the area that could be served by public transit. In addition, these weren't the only public transit opportunities in the communities. There's actually, in addition to the 2 flex routes, there's 4 other fixed route bus routes that serve these communities. So it really had potential to serve that first mile, last mile problem that so many people have brought up so far. These are very interesting communities. They're all growing. Most people drive to where they're going, but for people who don't have a car, it's almost impossible to get from where they live to where they need to go. Development patterns are those without sidewalks, really challenged in terms of mobility. So Georgetown's about 6% of residents without cars, and then fewer in fewer in Millsboro. Got a lot of new Americans who live there. Both of those towns have significant facilities that produce poultry products. So a lot of the employees there are key users of our service. It not only helps people who live in these towns, though, but helps people traveling from around Delaware who travel into those towns for work or for services, really to get to that place that they need to go ultimately. So we're really excited to have done this. We're seeing some ridership growth relative to our remaining Flex service, which is exciting. Our service just launched in April of 2021, so it's relatively new. We're only on about our 5th month here. But excited to see it continue as we work through this. So really excited to hear what everyone else has to say on the webinar.
Perfect, perfect. I'm going to ask, at the liberty of being the moderator, I'm going to ask a question that I think might be interesting to our TDM professionals that are with us here today. And then if it's all right, recognizing the time we have left, I might go to rapid fire questions that are coming in and ask the full panel if someone wants to raise their hand and answer it. We'll get as many questions answered before we wrap up at the top of the hour. What's really interesting, I think, as I look at these approaches, is that you're trying to locate areas that would be successful. But I haven't heard much about employers and how they've engaged with this program or the programs that you have. Love to kind of, especially with all the TDM professionals that we have here, how have you engaged employers? How have they responded? Are they supporting, whether it be through operational subsidy or the like? And again, if the answer is no, or it's new, or you've tried and you haven't been successful, I think those stories are also really valuable for our partners here.
I can start that one. So DTC sponsors Delaware Commute Solutions, which has been really a great partner in this. They've done much of the outreach to employers and really have set up some good relationships, helping familiarize people with this. At the same time, they relaunched something called the Get a Job, Get a Ride program. So when people get a new job, they get a transit pass for 30 days. And we're actively working to make that work for Dart Connect, and VIA has been very helpful in that. So shout out to them. I believe they're an ACT member.
Wonderful. Anyone else have success stories or challenges?
I think for us, it's too soon to tell. There are not very many major employers within our service zone other than Walmart, and we have not aggressively approached any of the employers yet. I think we need a little more data and a little more time under our belts before we do.
Definitely. Thank you. We'll go ahead and jump into the questions, and I will raise them. And if you don't mind raising your hand and providing an answer, that'd be great. One question that came up a couple times is fare structures. What is the cost that you are charging on a trip, and how does it differ from, say, a fixed route service?
At that, ours is free at the moment. We still extended the process, but also in the state of Virginia, and Tiffany can probably speak to this better than I can. There's a program, or there's a midterm program about zero fare. If the communities are willing to support that. So, but at the moment, ours is free.
Yes, Terry?
So ours is free now, also obviously, because we're still not collecting fares, but I can tell you that we put fare boxes actually on our vehicles, and we decided to keep the fare the same as our fixed route structure, just to try to make it easier for everyone, because in the region we use smart trip cards. So by using the fare box, we could accommodate cash for Title VI or the smart trip cards for people that already had them. And we also distribute those for our students population. So it just sort of made it easier for the drivers as well as for the basic population. And as we change our fares, obviously we'll change it to be in accordance with whatever our fixed route fare is.
Great, great.
Yeah, Dart's answer is the same as Terry's answer. Well, a little bit different. I guess we do charge fares. We have fare boxes on board, but it's the same as fixed route.
Gotcha.
And we
Gotcha.
made that decision because we reprogrammed an existing bus service.
Yeah, yeah. One question that came up that I think that's probably really valuable because it sounded like a mouthful for an acronym. What were the FTA grants that folks have used for your deployments? And if you can slowly articulate what they are so folks can write them down, that'd be great.
Sure. So for DRPT, it's Integrated Mobility Innovation, so IMI. And I believe Nate said his was AIM, which is accelerating, accelerating integrated mobility. Is that the?
Yep. Yeah.
So AIM and IMI. So if you type in FTA, IMI, and AIM, those should pop up. It's going to be a little different than I think the MOD Sandbox, which is another FTA program.
And am I accurate? None of the current programs that FTA is using are authorized, as in, into perpetuity. We're kind of at this moment using scraps here and there to support these programs.
Yeah, I don't think there's been any indication that this is going to be kind of a rolling annual, I guess, grant program. So whenever there's a NOFO that's released, usually you should just jump for it.
Plan ahead and jump for it. Got it. Noted. So maybe for our statewide transit providers, there was a question that came in. How are your innovation services structured organizationally? Are they standalone departments or dispersed throughout the planning staff?
Yeah, so our agency, it started with the Chief Innovation Officer, Veronica Vanterpool. She led a lot of these efforts, and credit to her, but she was recently named Senior Advisor to the FTA. So we're really excited about that. And we took the opportunity to restructure. So we're now, our office is under that of the Chief Performance Officer of the Delaware Transit Corporation, which actually has a lot of really good potential applications. So in that office also is our Office of Public Carrier that regulates third-party mobility providers, which our program is going to incorporate. So in addition to providing service with DART branded vehicles, we're also working with our small business public carriers in Southern Delaware to get them providing service under this app at public transit prices. So it's really exciting for that potential synergy.
Perfect.
I wish I could say we're quite as sophisticated as Nate is for his innovation services. So the nature of DRPT being a sister agency to the Virginia Department of Transportation, most of the time we're, all the other states, we're all nested under one agency. So we ourselves have kind of pulled together in the terms of our transit planning division, select staff. I mean, we're only an agency of roughly 60, 62 at our peak right now in terms of employees. So really we have myself and maybe a couple other planners that are, as we are available, working on that. I will say that Virginia does have an Office of Strategic Innovation that's under VDOT, and they have been an excellent partner with us when it has come to any research components or projects that have come out. And through Office of Innovation, they've also had the another acronym I'm going to throw you away, Innovation Technology and Transportation Fund, ITTF. And so that funding source has been dedicated to support a lot of demos and pilots throughout the state. And some of these microtransit pilots that, for example, that we are looking to deploy over the next year or so have been supported through those funds. So hopefully maybe as we expand, we'll have a little bit something more sophisticated, but right now it's me and one or two other planners.
Perfect. I'll see if we can squeeze two in, but maybe we won't be able to. But this might only be a question to Terry and Nate. Have you been able to start to evaluate the cost of operating your microtransit services, maybe in an apples to apples or an apples to orange comparison to your fixed route service? How is it performing?
So I can start that one. I can tell you that we began that just as we hit COVID. So I don't know if they were able to collect the data from, we launched our service in June of 2019. And so we had run for several months, and it takes a little while for us to get the operating expenses, because for us, these were a new and different type of vehicle. So I know that is the plan. I don't know that that's been completed yet in terms of comparing it. But I know that's on the radar to do relatively soon.
Perfect.
Yeah, and for our service, so it just launched in April, and we had a free fare period until May 12th. These are expenses that the DTC was planning on spending anyway. We had these as previously flex service routes. So a boost in ridership is a boost in fare box revenue. But nonetheless, like our transit system statewide is supported by a significant amount of money that comes from Delaware's Transportation Trust Fund, which is funded by a number of different revenue sources.
Perfect. Perfect.
So we're doing a little better, but is it ever going to pay for itself? No. And will it ever be as efficient as a fixed route bus? Probably not.
Definitely. Well, let me, there was a question on Virginia's expansion plans. Please follow up with Tiffany directly. I'm sure she's plotting something, and maybe you'll be in the next FTA acronym soup funding pool, but time will tell. I'm going to go ahead and ask one last question, if that's all right, Elizabeth. And this is the question to the full group here. If you had one thing that you would advise your colleagues throughout the country here that are listening in, that are maybe considering moving forward in this space, what would be the first thing you would recommend that they do in terms of a consideration, a plan, et cetera? Maybe we'll start at the top, the way we started the conversation with Nate.
I would start talking to your agency colleagues about it. It's just it's new and it's not familiar, and like how people's roles in the agency will change and will be different if you try to implement this type of thing. Everyone is very used to providing fixed route and some demand response paratransit, and to throw a new thing in, it's completely different job roles for many people.
Terry?
I would say the same. The one thing I will add, what we found to be surprising is that of our operators, many of them were already former Uber and Lyft drivers. So when it came to implementing the technology, they were already well prepared, and we have a fairly well structured staff. So it wasn't that big a lift for us to add it. But the on-demand was a different operation for us because we don't serve that population. We contract that out now. But all in all, it went fine. And I think that would be something that you would want to consider, is how whether you're going to do it in-house or whether you're going to contract it out, and how similar it is to the operations that you already have and the roles.
That's fascinating. Yeah, we'll go down to Mitch.
One thing I could say is, if you're going to get into this, make sure you're ready to stay the course. And all of transit, all you hear about demand response transit is, well, I see your buses driving around all the time. They only have 1 or 2 people on there. And so, I just make sure you're ready to stay the course and learn the lessons later on, and be willing to get on the ground and do some legwork with it.
Perfect. Thank you. Ken?
I would, because it's a new concept, and particularly to rural areas that don't have a familiarity with Uber and Lyft-like services, for us, a critical piece was getting a champion within our local county government to help us get the support that we needed at the local level. For us, that was a real critical piece. They've been instrumental in promoting and supporting this. And it's because we brought them in early on into the planning sessions and the meetings with VIA when we were setting it up. It's really helped us a lot to have a liaison with the local government to help support this new project.
Great. And then Tiffany.
I think the number one thing when we're thinking about microtransit is what is the need or the problem that the microtransit service is going to be a solution for. So a lot of times it's more of a question of thinking Is this something to help an underperforming fixed route service? Is this a first mile, last mile connection? Or is it something that can eventually migrate into more of the demand response paratransit service? So, if it's one thing of thinking about testing how microtransit solutions could work in your service area, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think having a clear idea of what that solution is going to meet in your community will help kind of navigate where the service is going to be focused and what that model will look like.
Hear, hear. Well, that's the masterclass. I will thank the panel, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it back to Elizabeth to close us out.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. This was a really great conversation. There was a ton of questions that I know we didn't get to, so we'll do our best to see if we can follow up with you all. But thank you again to our panelists and to VIA for organizing all of this. And I will close this out with stay tuned. Our next webinar is going to be on September, what day is that? The 23rd, in 2 weeks. So hopefully we will see you there. And thanks again. And look for the recording in shortly. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you all.